Well, hello and welcome back to Curlis Mania, where we talk all things pop, rock, and prog. Um, you know, one band that I've been doing a lot of battles, a lot of different stuff. One band that I haven't touched yet, one of my all-time favorite bands, is Yes. So first of all, before I say anything more, I got to welcome back to the channel, Mr. Scott Davis. How are
How
you,
you doing,
Scott?
Tom? How you doing, man? Great to be back. It's always a good time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No question. I mean, and Scott knows his stuff, man. And if you haven't heard Myth of Logic, you got to check that out.
Thank
It's
you.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's got two records out and he's working on a third. I guess you're pretty close to wrapping the third, aren't you?
I have to be finished around August 1st, and then it'll go off to Alan Douches for mastering, and I'm looking to release it September the 15th. That may change. I have it. That's my target date. I have an alternate date in October that I can use if we don't make that date, but I would like to make the September date. So we'll see.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, I'm excited for that. Can't wait for that. I mean, Scott is a very talented fellow, man.
Thank
It's like
you.
one man band stuff, and it's incredible. It sounds like a band. So you got
Thank
to check
you.
that stuff out. But we are here to talk about another band, which I said earlier called Yes, and we are going to. When I talked to Scott about this, I really want to do Yes, and we started going back and forth. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? I mean, Yes is this massive band. What are we going to do? So many different eras. And Scott said, you know what? How about, and this was just like came out of left field, he goes, how about drama versus 90125? And I went, oh, yes, like that is cool. I like that pick. That is cool because
Yes.
there's so much story behind all of these, both of these albums.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And there's also, I mean, they're not only are they awesome albums, but they're kind of an era that people don't talk about as much. People talk about, Fragile, Close to the Edge gets talked to death, um, you know, Tales. I see a lot of stuff on Tales from Topographic Oceans all over the place. People talk about that album all the time. But there's a lot of records that to me are some people kind of go, "Pfft, like that's not real Yes." And I'm like, whoa, I kind of tend to differ. I think you might be in the same boat, Scott.
I think that a lot of people just don't really pay close attention to it. If you really listen to those two albums, both of them, there is an awful lot of classic yes-isms filtered through both of them. Now, you have different people driving the boat for each album, but a lot of the primary elements are still there. The amazing Chris Squire drives this thing through both of those albums. I mean, Chris is just, I could go on and on about Chris alone for hours, but that consistency, and Alan as well, Alan White on drums. I mean, it just there's a lot of very yesy characteristics. For instance, on drama, there's Hammond everywhere, absolutely everywhere on that record,
Yes.
and Moogs everywhere, and classic synth sounds and classic bits of yes arrangement. So, you're right. I have always felt that the so-called classic Yes fan, those fans who stick to the no Anderson rule, or the no how rule, or whatever rule it is they're making for themselves. I think they might be cheating themselves a little bit if they can sort of set that aside and really listen. There's an awful lot for the classic Yes fan to enjoy on both of these albums.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So like we
yeah.
said, this is the battle. Drama
Mhm.
versus 90125. This is
Woo!
yes, here we go. So so now I got to do a quick run up to drama. So I'm going to just it helps to have a little bit of backstory, coming up to this record especially because there's a lot to cover. I'm going to try to cover it pretty quickly here. But I'm going to start with the making of Tormato, which was 1978.
Mhm.
And apparently, according to some sources, there was a little tension in the making of that record. There was like some artistic tension happening during the making of that album. And I think it kind of shows on the album a little bit. This is the album we're talking about. Um,
Love
and
that album too.
I love it. I do love this record, and I think there's some amazing pieces of music on here. There's no question. And there is on almost I mean, there's so much Yes that just is worth listening to. Um, Almost all of it, honestly. And but still, you can tell there's a little bit of disjointedness to this. There's something I can't really put my finger on, but it's kind of a little, and it didn't really do as well at the time. It didn't do as well as usual Yes numbers when it was released. I believe it was released in September '78.
I think
Um,
that's correct, yeah.
Yes, and then this is coming out off the back of a huge success for Going for the One, where Rick Wakeman came back to the fold, and they had this huge album and tour, and they were back, and then they put this album out, and it didn't feel as successful as Going for the One. Um, and so anyway, so this, they tour for Tormato, right? And in 1978 and early '79, they reconvened to write new material for the next record in November of '79. Okay. And so something goes wrong when they reconvene. And basically what's happening is music is changing rapidly at this time. I mean, we always have to remember in '79, '80, things were really shifting into this sort of post-punk new wave. It was just like it was really hitting hard. There's all these new bands coming in, all these new sounds, the Cars, the Pretenders, the Knack, all these bands.
The
Music is
Clash.
the Clash,
Mm,
exactly.
yeah.
Things are shifting, right? London Calling just came out, exactly.
Mhm.
So the lot of big albums from these sort of post-punk bands or punk bands, and so the label is like, and also coming off Tormato, which didn't do as well. The label's kind of going, hey, why don't you switch things up a little bit? Why don't you try a producer? Why don't you try, for example, Roy Thomas Baker? How about that? He did Foreigner, he did the Cars, he's done Queen. Like, why don't you go in the studio with him? They try it. They say, okay, we'll try it. They go into the studio with him. It doesn't happen. And what I remember for the longest time wondering why John left. And here's part of my theory. I was thinking about this earlier today, and I was reading a little bit more about it. And you think about this straight off the Tormato tour. Yes had been going nonstop now for 10 years. They started in '69, and they had been just going album tour out for pretty consistently for about 10 years. Who are the only two people that hadn't changed in the band? Chris and John. Those are the only two guys. And they've been in each other's back pockets for 10 years. And that's a lot of time together. And I think they
Mm.
were having a little bit of this going on, just a little bit. And I think that John was writing more with Wakeman for this upcoming record, and he was writing this sort of usual John stuff, like a little lighter, little kind of the usual John Anderson type song. And I think Chris was thinking like, can we get a little tougher and harder? Like things are changing. Can we change it up a little bit? Can we get a little? And I think the two of them were having these artistic disagreements. So, so long story short is that John and Rick go to the bar and they're like, this isn't the band I remember. What's going on with this band? What's happening? This is not what I want to go. This isn't the direction. And Wakeman says, yeah, you're right. I agree. It's not. And so they decide to essentially they leave the band. They say, you know what? We're done. We're out. And they leave the band. And I'm sure they were like, oh my God, would John just, I mean, Wakeman had come and gone already once, but so it's like, whatever, Wakeman's gone, but John left, like, oh my God. So, but I don't think Chris had that much hesitation. I think he had a little bit of like, uh-oh, but I think he just kept moving forward, like, we're going to keep going. And, essentially they draft in the Buggles, who's Jeff Downs and Trevor Horn come in from the Buggles, and they start writing material with I mean, how great a keyboard player and a singer, and they're like, bring them in, and they start writing material pretty quickly, and that leads up to what becomes Drama. So I'm going to hand it over to Scott now for his take on Drama.
One of the astounding things that needs to be pointed out, Tom, is that, Anderson and Wakeman left in mid-January. In that time, early November of 1980, Yes played, I believe it was 3 sold-out shows at Madison Square Garden,
Wow.
having recorded, released, rehearsed, gone on tour, showed up at Madison Square Garden. I mean, it's at the rate things happen these days, it's an astonishingly
So
short period of
fast.
time.
That's
The
so
fact
fast.
the fact that the album is listenable at all astounds me given what they went through.
That is
Um,
great. That's a great point. It's so fast. It is.
one as I mentioned earlier, one cannot talk about Yes and not worship at the temple of Chris Squire. I think everybody gets it wrong, frankly. They talk about John Anderson, and certainly John is absolutely priceless and irreplaceable, probably the defining voice of progressive rock. But the guy in that band that everyone has to work around is Chris.
Yeah. Yep.
That sound, that approach, that unrelenting, loudest thing in the room that Chris always does, absolutely everybody, including whichever drummer he was playing, had to adjust to what he was doing. I'm just going to go on talking about the individual songs first here.
Okay.
Drummer was released August 22nd, 1980, and produced by Yes and Eddie Offord. The first song is Machine Messiah. The birth of modern progressive metal is Machine Messiah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
No one had ever heard that blending of aggressive guitars and all the prog elements, tricky time signatures, Hammond organs, Mellotrons, Mini Moogs, Chris Squire, all of that stuff that makes great prog melded with some crunchy guitars. I personally had never heard it applied in that fashion. An angry guitar sneaks in from behind. It's immediately apparent that Eddie Offord produced the basic tracks, which he did. Drama has a full and clear sound that some previous Yes albums, I'm not going to name names, did not have. As the vocals enter and the Hammond comes crashing in for support, there is no question that this is Yes. There is an adventurous attitude in play, but with much more determination and focus than things like Relayer or Topographic Oceans, which had their own intensities, but not focus, in my opinion. Then the master Chris Squire reminds us why he is the greatest bass player in prog, maybe in all of rock music in general. The interplay between the Rickenbacker and the Mini Moog is playful, masterful, and stunning. Nowhere else on the album, and perhaps in the band's entire catalog, do they truly sound like a band than they do here. A gathering of superior musicians motivated by this music they've created. Piano, guitar, mellotron all coalesce into a wave crashing to its shore. And then after a short acoustic interlude that's stunning all by itself, they slide back into the groove with more Hammond, more Rickenbacker, more guitars, all guiding it home. A stunning achievement. It's really indicative of the album as a whole and something that, you were when you were talking about Tormato. Tormato is the sound of five egos all coming at each other from different directions and nothing bouncing off the walls.
Mhm.
Going for the One was a more peaceful time in that band's lives with their relationships with one another. There's always been angst in that band, but that album is the sound of the band welcoming Rick back to the fold, and it was a joyous time for them. And it
Yeah.
reflects itself in my favorite Yes album, which is Going for the One.
Going for the One's great. Yeah.
Awaken is the top of everything. I adore that music.
Absolutely.
But the best Yes music is the Yes music where you have all these egos clashing, but yet something unified comes of it. The problem with Tormato is that there's not that unified feel to it. It
Yes.
it's five individuals kind of hammering at each other.
Mhm.
Drama sounds unified. You have five guys with one goal, and that goal is very clear. I suspect that it was Chris Squire himself who outlined all of this. I don't know that for a fact, but I have my suspicions that he was driving that boat.
I would
Uh,
guess that as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Second track is White Car, complete orchestral Fairlight workout that might have been at home on Time and a Word, frankly, with its orchestral feel.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
yeah, an interesting little interlude that might have been excellent if it had been fleshed out further. I like it, but it's a little too short, obviously. Does it really happen? Once again, we are reminded that this is more of a cooperative than ever, but there is no question that Squire is in charge. The introductory bass riff is classic Squire and a rite of passage for any prog bass player. You got to know how to play that song, and it's tricky.
It is too. It is.
Yeah. Guitars and keyboards weave and dance throughout. Classic Yes vocal gymnastics are a welcome reminder that although Trevor Horn is not John Anderson, He is a very fine singer. There's a short jammy instrumental reprise at the end of the tune, which I always thought would have been placed better at the end of the album after Tempest Fugit. That reprise at the end of Does It Really Happen?
Oh, interesting.
I
Interesting.
think they should have placed it at the end rather than right after Does It Happen, but it's a small point.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, Into the Lens. More forceful driving bass work from Chris with Alan at the top. Initially, it recalls In the Dead of Night by UK, but quickly becomes its own animal. Complex and engaging. This one has all the elements one would expect from prog at its finest, and yes, at its finest. The 2008 remaster really shows off how well performed and mixed this piece is. The Hammond makes itself known along with some Prophet 5 bits. Again, Trevor turns in a fine vocal. His voice impresses me as a slightly higher pitched, more mid forward version of Chris's voice. If you know Chris's solo work, Fish Out of Water, etc., and you compare the two, their timbre is very similar. Trevor's voice is pitched slightly higher and it has a little more mid forward tonality to it. Chris has a scoop in his upper mid ranges that Trevor doesn't have.
It's interesting. I
They're
never thought of that. That's a really interesting.
yeah, their two voices blend really well. I have this theory about people talk about the in the classic Yes days, the relatively polite Steve Howe approach and the more aggressive Chris Squire approach. I've always contended that those guys were just one big guitar just
Yeah.
crossing the ranges together.
Yep.
Anyway, Run Through the Light, perhaps the most Buggles feeling tune on the album. This is where we hear Trevor play fretless bass at Chris's insistence while Chris himself played piano. The Squire voice is mixed higher through the refrains, giving it a more classic Yes feel than it might otherwise have had. He does, as he does everywhere on drama, the maestro Hal, as I like to call him, bless him, sprinkles guitar work of all sorts throughout the song. Apparently, Steve did the majority of his guitar work by himself in isolation with no other input, and that apparently rubbed some of the guys in the band the wrong way. But all of his guitar, each part that he adds to each song is very well chosen and immaculately executed. Maybe some of Steve's best work is on drama.
Yeah. Like
Um,
you said, you mentioned, you're absolutely right. Just not to interrupt, I just thought I wanted to say that, like you said, they're not going like this. He's weaving. He's not
yeah,
into, you know what I mean?
yeah, it's as if the five of them got together and said, "We are just sick and tired of arguing with one another. Here's a united vision. Let's write and record and play toward that vision." And it just seems like everybody bought into it.
Yeah.
Tempest Fugit. Hammond rules again with at the top, the Squire flanged bass. First time I'd ever heard a flanger used on a bass. That was just
Yes. Yep.
amazing. Lurking close by and driving the whole thing home. Downs adds his vocoder with the yes, yes bits leading into the verse. Uh, Tempest Fugit. I mean, it's the perfect end to a perfect album. It really is. It's punchy and it's powerful and it's really hard to play. Um, yeah, I have a few notes here. The album peaked at number 2 in the UK and number 18 in the US. Became their first album since 1971 not to reach gold certification by the RIAA, and the first to miss the top 10 there since the Yes album. It was recorded in approximately 3 months at Townhouse, with each band member credited for its production, along with Hugh Padgham, Gary Langland, and Julian Mendelsohn as recording engineers. The sessions began with Eddie Offord, Yes's fantastic engineer and producer throughout the 70s, but several issues resulted in his departure as the album was being made. Downs has said that Offord, quote, left in strange circumstances. It was a fraught and manic time. Lots of drama.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he remained credited as producer of the backing tracks. In 2021, Howe revealed that he fired Offord when 3 weeks of increasingly erratic behavior by the engineer culminated with Hal being asked to come down to the studio cafe immediately, where Offord was frying a pigeon he had caught with the intent of eating it.
Okay.
Yeah. Padgham, who had previously worked on a session with the Buggles, accepted Horn's invitation to get involved. He recalled the difficulty in working with Yes during this time as the sessions were, quote, full of drama and so much tension. Music was put together in several London locations. Howe put down his tracks at RAK and Roundhouse recording studios. The rest was recorded at Townhouse and Sarm East. Howe recorded his parts in 2 weeks, saying, quote, I had total freedom. I went away and recorded 90% of the guitars on my own in a London studio and went back and presented it to the band. At first, people said, your guitars sound too bright and trebly. I said, no, shut up and use them.
Mhm. Yes.
that's that's a direct quote, apparently. Horn spoke about his efforts to get the album finished. Quote, I got married, and 2 hours later, I was back in the studio. We decided that for our honeymoon, we were going to spend 2 weeks in Miami Beach. It ended up as 3 days in Bournemouth, and Steve came along. We actually had a good time. So yeah, that's all my notes for 90125. Or I'm sorry, for Drama. One of my favorite albums, obviously. It's top three yes for me. I mean, I going for the one. Um, I think honestly, I don't, well, I'm not gonna spoil the other positions, but yeah, going for the one is my favorite Yes album, and Drama is right up there towards the top of the pile for me. It's so powerful and it's so punchy. It just it has a masculinity about it that Yes didn't always exhibit in their career.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just
There's like this ensemble playing that's just like seems just like incredible.
it seems more cooperative, yeah,
Yeah, and I
and
love
less
that
adversarial.
I love that you brought that up because I think that's really the problem with Tormato. It just feels like they're not rowing in the same direction. Whereas this album really feels like everyone's in the boat rowing in the same direction. And it's like for some reason, I don't know, maybe it was just the pressure of the situation and the drum that kind of made everyone focus. Because like you said, I agree with your word focus. It just feels very focused and coiled and just like, ooh, like I mean, you listen to Machine Messiah and you're like, whoa. I mean, it's like, wow. I mean, it's almost, it's the heaviest Yes has ever been, you
Mhm.
know? Uh,
Ever.
it's crazy. That whole like comes in and you're like, what is that? Like, what is happening? Is this Yes? You
Yeah,
know?
I guess Alan White wrote that riff.
Oh,
It
really?
was written on piano because it ascends. Da 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 da. A guitar player will typically, because it's easier to finger, write such riffs descending, not da 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 da. It would have
Right.
gone da 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 da. Um. Anyway,
And this
Alan did a fair amount of writing on this record. And there are things like that. Being a piano player and being a drummer, he's going to look at things like harmonic relationships a little bit differently.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, no, and Machine Messiah, like you said, it goes down to acoustics at one point. I mean, it's such a great song, it's just what a
Yeah.
great opener for the record, it just sets the tone so well. It goes down to that breakdown with acoustics, "Machine," like, okay, now it just went from, like, craziness to, like, just acoustic, and then it comes back. It's a crazy song, but it's awesome.
Yeah,
Love
yeah.
it.
One of my favorite moments in their career.
Oh my god, and
Yeah.
then, because it's funny because I was blasting this album today in preparation for this, and it just still it has aged well, man. I still love it. I still really love it. I mean, uh, like you had mentioned, "Does It Really Happen" is another great one. Uh,
Yeah.
Another great song. And that's I think that was definitely a Squire. I mean, I think a lot of this album is Squire led. Um, but the whole and then like you said the and whatever timing it is, it's just like hard to follow, but
Yeah.
it's so just so Squire that is just so screams Chris Squire. And it just the album and then Tempest Fugit, and I think the thing is, these songs didn't get played because once John got back in the band, he's like, "Hey, we're not playing those, we're not
Yeah.
playing the drama stuff." And it kind of, but now it's sort of like it became like this cult album for Yes fans. Like that album's great, because
It's
then they
kind of
would,
funny because
you know,
apparently in later years, John actually started to warm to the idea of playing some of those songs, but he was voted down at that time.
oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Tempest Fugit, I have a buddy that's like not even really much of a prog guy, but he loves Tempest Fugit. He talks about it all the time. He's like, that's such a jam. you
It's
know?
really hard to play. I have no idea how Squire was able to sing over top of that bass part. And the verse bass part is similar. It's a little bit different, but I mean, you've really got to have your independence together to nail that one and sing
Oh
the
my
harmony
God.
over it.
Definitely. For no question. There's
Yeah.
no question on that. And yeah, Tempest Fugit. And I love when it like later they would do what was it in the middle of Whitefish, they do a little bit of Tempest Fugit on the live record on
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and
oh,
that's the only flirtation they did with it until Benoit David shows up and they start playing, that stuff. I remember seeing that tour with Benoit, and they did Machine Messiah, and the place just went absolutely berserk.
I believe it.
Yeah, it was very, very cool. Alan was still in good health at that point, and Chris was doing well. Everybody was having a good time, and it was fun to see them embrace that, you know, sort of idiosyncratic period of their career.
So cool, so cool. So I am on board with drama. I absolutely I mean, it's amazing. This album, there's no reason this album should be this great. Like it's
No,
just,
you're right.
you know,
You're
how is it
right.
possible that this is great? This is a great album. Like you said, it was done so quickly. It's like, wow.
That might be why it's so good.
Yeah, maybe, maybe. So yeah, so let's I'm on board. So let's move on to the next album, 90125.
Okay.
All right. And this is basically, I mean, I'm just going to give the cliff notes. I mean, essentially, and you can jump in at any time. Essentially they do a tour, a US tour and a UK tour, or European tour for drama. In the US, I guess people were like, "Hey, sounds great, man. This is really good." But in the US, people were not really having a problem with it. Like you said, they were playing Madison Square Garden, selling out tickets. And I think they actually put tickets on sale before they made the announcement, but
Yep.
it didn't matter,
That's
right?
true. Yeah. No, it didn't matter. Yeah.
It didn't matter, so because they really lived up to it. But, I'm sure Trevor Horn was of course he was intimidated. I mean, trying to step into those shoes is not easy. And he was a Jess fan. I mean, he was like, I'm a huge fan of this band. I'm stepping in to try to replace John Anderson. Like, this is nuts.
Yeah.
And Chris kept telling him, like, hey man, you can do this, you can got it, you sound a lot like him. It's okay, do it, you go for it. And then, so the US tour went fairly smoothly. Then they got to the UK and it was a totally different story.
Yeah.
People are, yelling out, "Where's John? Where's Rick?" It was a little more adversarial. Um, they weren't as accepting of it. Is that what you remember?
Yeah, you have to. I'm not. I am definitely an Anglophile. I love everything English and British. I adore it. The humor and the culture and the food and the music, and it's something I really treasure. I think that the music fans over there, when they love something, musically, they get very possessive about it, and they're very resistant to change in general. That's a generality, obviously. I think the only reason Genesis got away with it is because he was already in the band. He was an insider. He was
Yeah.
not an outsider. Trevor Horn was an outsider. And not only was he an outsider, he came from the biggest pop band in the world at the time. And, Yes fans always kind of, particularly at that time, the classic Yes fans, were gonna, have a problem with that. They were gonna be resistant to it.
The noses
Uh,
went up.
yeah, yeah. It's unfortunate, and I'm certainly guilty of such behavior in my own listening habits of saying, "Oh, well, that can't possibly be good." Well, if you do listen with a critical ear, both of these albums will reward you with plenty of yesishness, to use the Maestro Howe's word. There's tons of it there to be had. Yeah, I was surprised to hear bits all through 90125 in my own critical listening in the last couple of weeks as I was prepping for this. There are some very yesy things on that record. I mean, it's what people have to, you have to at least acknowledge that album.
Yeah.
Mainly because if you have no 90125, I seriously doubt that there is a Yes today.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
That bought them the carte blanche to do whatever they wanted to do from that time forward, up to the present day, and it kept the band going and kept interest going, and so you have to at least, I think, appreciate it on that level. But yeah, there's a lot of very classic Yes kind of things on that album.
Yeah, I think that Yes didn't have much of a pulse in before 90125. I mean, but like after, when Trevor Horn decided I'm going back to producing and Jeff Downs left and did Asia, all of a sudden it was like, okay, Chris and Alan looking at each other again. Uh-oh, like here we go again. And then
Yeah,
now what do we do? And I think they were getting kind of tired of trying to resurrect the band. But then, long story short, they did like a single with Chris for Christmas called Run with the Fox together.
yeah.
And that's kind of a cool track. If you haven't heard it, check it out.
No, I've
Um,
got it. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's like a Chris Squire song basically with Alan
Hmm.
drumming. And then, along comes Trevor Rabin, who apparently Chris was given like a tape or something and said, "Have you heard this guy?" I think somebody at Atlantic, maybe Phil Carson, had said like, "Hey, if you guys, have you heard this guy?" And Chris heard the tape and was like, "Wow, this guy sounds like a one man foreigner," like
Yeah, yeah.
you know and so he called him up, and they had apparently had like sort of a rickety jam, but it worked. They liked each other a lot, so it was like, hey, I think we could do something. And he had obviously heard the riff for I heard the demo for Owner of a Lonely Heart, was like, wow, like apparently it was the very end of the tape, and you're like, oh my god, what is that?
Yeah.
So they anyway, so that's long story, but they end up getting together with Trevor, and they bring back Tony Kaye, and they call the band Cinema. That was the first name for the band. It wasn't going to be Yes, it was going to be a whole new start. Let's just start again from scratch and call it Cinema. And then next thing you know, John, he calls John up because I think there was they were listening to mixes of it, and they're like, something's missing. Like this could be an awesome album if we had like the vocals aren't quite there. I think that was Trevor Horn was saying that. He was like, the vocals just aren't quite what they need to be. And then Chris is like, gulp, picks up the phone, calls, dials the number. John, what's up? I know we haven't talked in like 5 years, but how you doing? You know? So yeah, so John was like, "Oh, okay, we'll send the tape or whatever." I would have loved to have heard that conversation.
Well,
But yeah, so
yeah, I've heard the legends about John and Chris's shouting matches. I can't imagine John Anderson shouting at anybody. I
yeah,
would not want to experience that because to be intimidating to somebody like Chris, who it was not only a big guy, but quite immutable, quite um, really didn't give a crap what anybody wanted.
didn't seem
He
like it.
was,
Yeah, he didn't seem
yeah.
like he cares much. Yeah. So yeah, apparently he said, "Hey, like take a listen to this stuff," and John literally liked it. He was like, "Wow, this is really great stuff." Like, so
Hmm.
and then he said, of course, he's like says to Chris, "Well, if I'm going to sing on this, it's going to be Yes. Is that
Yeah,
what you're trying to do?" And he goes, "Yeah, that's what we're
yeah,
going to." And
yeah.
so sure enough, I'm sure when they heard it back, and they're like, okay, we have to call this Yes. Like this is, forget it now. It's over now. We got to go back to Yes. So that's the basic backstory. So yeah, I just wanted to do the quick basic backstory, and then hand it over to you for your impressions on this record.
Okay, 90125, released November 7th of 1983, the year I graduated from high school.
Yeah.
Uh, produced by Trevor Horn, and yes, I actually saw the tour in Kansas City.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, it was awesome. They were supposed to have the band Berlin open for them, but apparently something went down with John Anderson and that band's management or some of the band. They were fired from the tour. I'll never forget that because we had no idea. We came in and there was a huge video screen across the front of the stage, and they played about 20 minutes worth of Bugs Bunny cartoons instead. Uh,
Okay.
Not sure what that was all about. So maybe somebody knows. All right. Album opens with Owner of a Lonely Heart. We hear a brief drum loop followed by that guitar riff, perhaps the riff of the 80s. Sound, approach, everybody knows it. It's easy to play, but it's just big and punchy and powerful.
So memorable. Yeah.
Oh yeah. The song then eases into its groove, peppered by little events throughout, a technique that Trevor Horn would employ throughout his career. There's all these little orchestra hits and little riffs and little, all these little transitionary bits that are, I call them events.
Yeah. Yeah. Didn't he
Anyway,
do that with Art of Noise as well? Like he,
oh yeah, Art of Noise was almost exclusively events.
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Orchestra hits from the Fairlight, that guitar solo, again, probably the guitar solo of the 80s.
So cool.
So unique and so unbelievably powerful. They're really perfect for that song. Yank Back Down to Earth with clean chorus guitars and the ever-present Squire sound just hammering away. Beautifully layered harmonies sprinkled everywhere. Um, One thing I would like to say is that, I was a Trevor Rabin fan years prior to 90125.
Oh, you
Uh,
were? Okay.
yeah, I want I he had an album out that was called Trevor Rabin with a picture of his face on the front of it, and there's a song on there, a really cool song called "Finding a Way Back Home," or it might be "Finding Me a Way Back Home," I can't remember the exact title. But it's just an incredible record. If you I being familiar with his solo work, when 90125 came along, I can very easily pick out the bits that are Trevor Rabin and the bits that are other influences of the other band members.
Yeah.
They're very clear.
You kind of wonder, you kind of, yeah, you have like little moments where like, oh, who is that? Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, Trevor is quite an imposing figure because, he's a multi-instrumentalist. And he's exceptional at all of the instruments that he plays. Apparently he was winning piano competitions when he was 6.
Yeah.
And so it's maddening to think that, his first instrument was piano. He's such a burner on guitar. By the way,
Tremendous
his
musicians.
Hi his most recent solo album, Rio, is fantastic. If you like
Oh,
90125 and
is
you
it?
like Tre
Yeah.
oh, it is. It's really, really good.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll
it's
check it out.
it's good to hear him sing again because
Yeah.
he really does. My favorite Trevor Rabin quote, and being a songwriter and, an artist and producer myself, he once said, "When you write a song, there are 2 ways of doing it, your way and the wrong way."
Oh, that's hilarious. That's funny.
And that's a call to arms right there. It's like, okay, I dare anybody to face off with me. If it's my song, there's one way to do it.
Yeah. Yep.
Anyway, hold on. Big drum intro. Scalding little guitar solo at the beginning. Wonderful tight harmonies from Squire and Anderson. Rabin and Anderson's vocals blend and swap positions with each other, seemingly at will. If you listen carefully, you can tell how they're swapping vocal positions and coming back and forth. A short guitar break replaces the second verse. More big fat harmonies. Nice little Rabin lead break to break up the refrains. More big fat bass guitar. That's the thing about Chris Squire. He's just that elephant in the room. I mean, he's as soon as he grabs an instrument and starts to play, it just commands itself all over everything. And Hold On certainly has that. But like I said earlier, if you listen carefully to Hold On, there are a bunch of yesisms in that song that very much link it to the band's past history. I'd also like to interject in here that I thought that Tony Kaye was a very unusual choice for coming in to play keyboards. And it's mainly because all the things that Yes were about at that point were things that originally drove him out of the band, new keyboard technologies and new approaches. He was very much a traditional Hammond guy, and he really didn't want to know much about anything else. And they wanted someone who was interested in, other keyboards, synthesizers, mellotrons, things like that. And apparently that's one of the reasons why they brought Rick Wakeman in. So I found it very odd that they would bring back Tony at that point, but it was an inspired choice because on the live stuff that they did later, I mean, he plays very, very well and he fits in very nicely.
Yeah. Yeah.
It can happen. Sitars, 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 big synth pad, Squire riffing, then that voice. I mean, Anderson's voice just rides effortlessly over anything you put it on. You
Mhm.
just record him and you bring up the fader, I imagine. I think that's all you have to do.
Hit
I,
record.
yeah, I once heard Anderson being talked about by Rick Wakeman, and he described him as being almost inhuman because he would start out, a session all kind of croaky and soft and he said by the second or third hour he's getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And he said, in this interview, he said, I don't know if you know anything about singers. It doesn't happen that way.
Yeah,
They warm up
that's
and they're at
unique.
their best,
Yeah,
and it
right.
goes down from there. But Anderson, yeah, with every preceding hour, he gets stronger, he gets better.
Interesting.
So yeah, that was kind of odd. Let's see
Sings
here.
that song so well. Oh my
Oh
god.
yeah,
It Can Happen. Oh yeah. Oof.
yeah. Backing vocals are expertly panned and mixed on that. That's a real treat on headphones. The way everything is balanced so well. Pre-chorus changes sound stage completely down to a much smaller sound, and then we get big again for the refrains. Wonderful piano and guitar work leading into and through the verses. Very yes-ish, as I said before, on concerted listening. Nice guitar lead section with support from Squire. It's typical of later period, yes, in that the approach is more unified and more rhythmic. Earlier, yes, tends to be more solo oriented and more melodic.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not the only one who's made that differentiation. I think Wakeman himself has commented on that. Anyway, moving along, we're into changes. Marimba intro leading into full blown ensemble madness, broken up by a Raven insanity pause. That's what I call his little bursts. I call it an insanity pause because he's done it several times throughout his career, not just here on this album and the two songs that everybody knows where he's got that one where everything just stops and he goes
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
It's one of his trademark style things. He doesn't ever overuse it, but it's fun when he does place one of those insanity breaks or insanity pauses, as I call them. Beautiful verses, subtle instrumental ornamentation. Anderson and Squire take over the refrain. Wonderful drum fill from Allen leading into the second verse. Overall, the album is less wet than I remembered. I remember it being a wash and reverb.
Yeah.
It's not Asia Alpha. Okay.
No, it's not.
That album is way too wet.
Ridiculous what
There's
reverb. Yeah,
reverb on the bass guitar for crying out loud. I mean, they just went nuts with digital reverb everywhere on that one. But
yeah.
this one is overall less wet than I had remembered. Anderson sings the last verse to a nice little change up. Cinema, wonderful tune. Yes, got their first and I believe their only Grammy win for the song Cinema. It's a wonderful, big, pompous, odd time workout. It shifts between 7 and 10. Huge flanged bass guitar. The only thing wrong with it is it's too damn short. And
Yeah.
ironically, it was originally part of a piece called Time that was 20 minutes long. And that was the first 2 minutes of it. And they just said, well, we'll just stick this 2 minute piece in there. I would love to hear the piece in
Love to
its
hear the
full
rest of it.
glory.
Yeah, yeah.
Leave It. More verb.
Yeah.
The beginning of Leave It is very wet, and then it's gone. As soon as it
Yes.
gets to that big thing, the reverb goes away and it gets very small again. Another Trevor Horn thing. Wonderful yes-ish vocal interplay. I kind of feel like if they had omitted the drum machine parts, which are very subtle and very tastefully applied, I think it would have lent a little bit more punch if Alan had actually played his kit drums on
Yeah.
that. He does play drums on it in most of it, a lot of it, um, along with, but the parts where the drum machine is or the Simmons pads that he played live. I think it was drum machine in the studio, but anyway, I've always thought that maybe, yeah, maybe real drums would have helped it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Our Song. That's my favorite song on this album. I
Such
absolutely
a
love it.
sleeper track. Yeah.
It's so weird and wonderful. That beginning
Yeah.
part with the odd entry, that's Trevor Rabin, buddy. That is Trevor all the way. You will
Do,
hear
do,
that.
do, 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 do.
Yeah.
Or no,
Yeah.
sorry,
Do,
that's
do, do,
Bob.
do, 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 do.
Yeah.
Do, 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 da. Do, 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 do.
Du, du,
Ra, da, 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 ba, ba. Yeah,
du, 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 du,
that
du.
is
Yeah.
all
Very
Trevor. If you
Trevor. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, if you dig into his earlier solo catalog, you will hear that kind of stuff. Great driving song, tight harmonies, dominant bass guitar pushing everything along, immaculately guitar breaks. Very nice restatement of the main theme at the end. I really like that. City of Love, I really like the track. There's not it's so it's a very much a feel song, which is not something Yes is really known for. Uh, Very rhythmic punch. It has a laid back, almost kind of a drunken sort of a blah, blah,
Yeah.
it's very, it's not something that they flirted with much, but they do it very, very well. And Trevor's patented refrains that he comes up with, I mean, it's all over that
Yeah,
song.
I can almost hear Trevor on that song saying, "Chris, lay back a little bit," because Chris is
Yeah.
usually on top of it. He's like, "Lay
Mm-hmm.
back. This is a groove. Let's do a groove."
Yep. Yep. Hearts. It sounds very much like a full group effort. Solid contributions from everyone. Refrain is among the most beautiful things Yes has ever produced, I think. It's just a wonderfully constructed song. Um, some of Rabin's best lead work can be found on it. And the end part with John, if you don't hear that and think of Soon, you don't have a heart. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
when that fades out at the end, the hairs stand up exactly the way with Soon.
I
It's
get
the
the same
same
thing. Like,
thing.
there's something about the
Yeah.
end of Hearts that's like really touching. Like, there's
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. When on that tour, John actually played Soon by himself,
Hmm.
just playing basic block keyboards and singing "Soon, oh soon the
Yeah,
light." And it's so I can't remember where they placed it in the set, but it was so beautiful. It was between a couple of really active frenetic tracks, and it was this little interlude between the two, and it was like their way of reminding people who they were he put on the witch hat and let them know who they're dealing with. This is Yes, and we want to remind you of that fact. John Anderson is here, and yeah.
yeah. That
uh
that whole like at the end, that's sailing down the river, and then it's
mhm.
I'm hearing it, I'm leaving it. It's like, oh, it just gets me every time. I love that.
Yeah, that's very Anderson-ish, very Yes-ish. Again, I would like
Yeah.
to point out that if you listen, if you're willing to cast aside your prejudices the way I do about certain kinds of music as well, and certain albums I've had prejudices about, if you're willing to sit down and listen with a critical, close ear, you're going to hear stuff like that. A couple notes real quick. Named for its Atco catalog number, 90125 was released to a generally positive reception and introduced the band to a new generation of fans. Number 5 in the US, number 16 in the UK, it remains their best selling album with several million copies sold in the US. Of the album's 4 singles, Owner of a Lonely Heart was the most successful and is their only song to top the US Billboard Hot 100 chart. Cinema earned the group a Grammy Award for Best Rock Instrumental Performance. They toured for the album all of 84 and 85, two headline shows at the inaugural Rock in Rio Festival. The album's logo was designed and created by Gary Muat. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. At Assorted Images on an Apple IIe computer, and a variant would be used on yeah, yeah,
There it is.
and a variant would be used on Yes's next studio album, Big Generator. Trevor Rabin's 2003 album, 90124, which was essentially demos. If you've not heard that, that's really, really
Oh,
interesting.
yeah, I've heard of that. I gotta check that out.
It's
Yeah.
interesting stuff. It uses the same cover design with color and text variations. I became involved as I'd worked with Trevor Horn when he set up the ZTT record label, Mott told Classic Rock. At that point, the band were called Cinema. The original design was similar to the eventual sleeve, but with the elliptical gray Y on its side and without the stick to make it a C.
Oh,
But
okay.
when John Anderson came back, they reverted to Yes. I know some fans think the sleeve was inappropriate, but Yes wanted something completely different to the Roger Dean works and were interested in using modern design technology as it fit the new techniques they were using. One more little point. This is kind of interesting. The lyrics to our song mention the city of Toledo, Ohio, itself a reference to the band's show at the Toledo Sports Arena on the Going for the One tour, where the temperature on stage reached 126 degrees Fahrenheit. The
Wow.
song received considerable radio airplay in the Toledo area.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they talk about Toledo a lot in that song.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So yeah, 90125. I'm a big fan. I loved it when it came out. Have you heard "Owner of a Lonely Heart" too many times? Yeah, you probably have. But if you sit and listen to it carefully, you will hear things that you didn't hear before, and that applies to the whole album. It's very well crafted, well produced. Hats off to Trevor Horn. His hand is all over it, obviously. Um, but I'd like to point out, obviously the Chris Squire element. I would like to point out Alan White through both of these albums. Alan is just a drummer of stupendous taste and feel for exactly what should happen at any given moment. I think when the great drummers are discussed, Alan is sometimes left out of that conversation, and I think that's a real travesty because his approach and his sound were always what was called for. Always. If it called for him to overplay, he was ready, Jack, and he was on top of it. If it called like at the beginning of Hearts, where he's just playing the crotales, the tuned Turkish cymbals. If
Yeah.
that's all the song needs, that's what I'm going to do. If the song doesn't need anything, I'm not going to play anything.
Right.
That's in a drummer. That's an admirable trait because drummers don't always want to not play.
Yeah. Yeah, that's restraint in a drummer is very key.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, I mean, you're right. And you think about it, we talk about, Chris Squire just like bowing at the altar of Chris Squire, right? I
yep,
do too. I mean,
yep.
someone as phenomenal as he's sticking with Alan. Like he and Alan stayed together for years and years and years.
Hmm.
So obviously, Chris is not going to play with a slouch, right? So I mean,
No,
Alan has got skills, and like you said, no one ever mentions him. No one ever
yeah.
talks about Alan White, and I'm telling you, that guy was killer, killer drummer.
Yeah, it's so funny and it's so wonderful when you look at their career and you start to think about things like, had Bruford not quit, how many albums would we never have been privy to? I'm sure we wouldn't have gotten. Uh, we likely would have gotten Relayer. We likely probably would have gotten Topographic, maybe in slightly different form because Alan wrote a lot of music for that.
Okay.
Um, but certainly, I mean, I don't see Bill playing on 90125.
No, no.
And that's no that's just I'm just pointing it out. I'm not saying it would have been better or worse either way. I'm just astonished by if you think about the career of this band, it's the same as other people's careers. What would have happened? It's just like we've talked about Genesis recently. What would have happened if Peter hadn't left?
Yeah.
What would they have done?
Hmm.
Who knows? But we got two parallel, astonishing catalogs after that split.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for things like that. But one has to wonder what would have happened had Bill stayed with the band. Alan was the right guy at the right time. Chris was ready for a change in the rhythm section. He- Uh, Alan is more what we call a bottom kit player, more kick drum based. He's working more off that. Bill's always been more of a top kit player, brass, toms, that kind of thing,
Right.
in a
Right.
general sense. But
Yeah.
anyway,
I always love that Bruford snare sound. That little
oh yeah,
cracking
crack.
snare that he's got. Yeah. But yeah, Bruford and Alan White, both amazing drummers, right? So I mean, both
I
of them.
always like to fly the Alan White flag whenever I get the chance because
Yeah.
um, he was a well-rounded musician. Well, so was Bruford for that matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Very
Absolutely.
well-rounded musicians, both of them. But
No, I mean, I think you have to be. You're
I
playing with
think
the.
on these two albums we're discussing, Alan White might be the MVP because there's so many things that happen that really rely on his ability to play exactly what's necessary.
I love it. I'm so happy you're bringing that up because I really
Yeah.
think on both of these records he is killing it. So
Yep.
no question. And
Yep.
like you said, 90125 really brought Yes back to life. It really did. I mean, I remember back in the day, Owner of a Lonely Heart was all over MTV. It was all over. And it was on the radio. It was everywhere. I mean, it was a
Yep.
huge song. And I remember seeing that video all the time of the guy walking through the crowd and having the and having the having those like little whatever
Yeah.
things were, he's having like little episodes. Um, but it was a cool video, and I remember think everyone was into it. Like everyone was like, "Oh, have you heard that song, Owner of a Lonely Heart?" I mean, even people that weren't, you know, that weren't prog people, that were like, "This is a great song." So it really brought Yes back to life. And when you see interviews with them, there's some interviews on YouTube of them. Like I think they're on tour for the 90125, and they are all they're all just so happy. Like you could just tell these interviews are like they are just beaming because they're like, "Oh, we are back, and we're so back. We're
Mhm.
so back." Um, and anyway, but they made a great record. So I mean, it was undeniable. I think 90125 is a very strong album, very well produced. Like I said, Trevor Horn's got his hands all over it,
Mhm.
but in a good way. And Trevor Rabin, it's like this is the first time I'd ever heard of Trevor Rabin, and the guy is just he's so talented. I mean, just huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, it was a loaded band between, and Trevor and Chris and John all sing, and they all have good voices. So it's like three people just cranking out vocals, which is really cool.
Yeah. Steve has an acceptable harmony voice, obviously.
Right.
But he's not suited to do lead vocals. Trevor can belt out a lead vocal.
He
So
can jump
there's
on a lead if he wants to.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So
And that's neither one is better or worse. It's just different approaches.
yes.
I have nothing but sincere admiration for both of those men and what they've accomplished. But like you say, when you've got a band of this sort, three really strong voices
Mhm.
are, a good thing. I would almost compare it to King's X, where you've only got three people, but they all sing
I'll
very
sing.
well.
Yeah.
It's funny.
Right.
I remember an MTV interview once where they were talking to King's X and oh, what's the guitar player's name? I'm gonna kick myself.
Uh,
Doug
uh,
Pinnick's the bass
Pennick's the
player.
bass player, right? I
Ty
can't remember.
Tabor, Ty
Yes.
Tabor.
Yes.
They were talking with him, and the interviewer said, "Oh, you all sing," and Ty says, "Well, he sings," pointing at Doug. "We sing along."
That's
So I guess the distinction there was that Trevor sings and Steve sings along.
right. Right. So totally. Totally. That's exactly right. So,
Yeah.
say it better. So I would say it's come to that time, Scott, where we have to, unfortunately, we have to make a choice. Music, I say this all the time, music is not a competition. I just do this for fun. We do it because we want to talk about these albums, which we've just
Yeah.
done for like an hour. And we could do another hour, but we have to keep it somewhat short because people's attention spans aren't there. Um, but if you were, if it came down to it and you had to choose between Drama and 90125, both excellent records in their own right, which one would you pick?
Drama.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, and it's such I say it quickly
Yeah.
and almost callously, but
Right.
uh, since we'd first discussed this idea, 6 weeks ago or whatever it was,
Mhm.
I've been going back and forth. I mean, tomorrow you could ask me, and it might be the other record, but
Right.
drama just,
There's
uh,
something about this album.
yeah, it has it has such a direct connection musically to the earlier Yes music with the prevalence of the Hammond everywhere, and the bits where Chris and yeah, where Chris and Jeff are fighting it out, Rickenbacker versus Minnie Moog on Machine Messiah. I have emulated that in my own music. If you said you've been listening to some Myth of Logic, well, you've probably heard me, echoing back to that technique where the Moog and the bass fight each other out a little
Possibly,
bit.
yeah. Possibly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that's definitely influenced me. That I just there was something about drama, something about the time. I was 16 that year. We'd never heard anything quite like it. I still remember the first time I heard Tempest Fugit on the radio on KY 102 in Kansas City.
Yeah.
KYYS. It just blew me away. It completely blew me away. I thought, my God, this is because it just has such a modern punch to it without sounding trendy of the times. It does not sound like a record that was made in 1980. 90125 sounds like a record of its time.
It does, it does.
Drama does not. Drama sounds like a record that could have been made yesterday.
Yes,
It
and
has a
that's why, yeah, that I'm exactly that's why I'm picking drama as well. That's also
yeah,
my pick. And
yeah.
that's exactly one of the reasons for sure is that like you just said, it feels it doesn't feel dated. It just there's something
No,
about it that doesn't feel dated. It feels like a band playing in a room, which is
right.
what it almost what it was. Um and this album, as much as I love this record and I think it's got great moments on it for sure. I mean, I really enjoy this album.
Yeah.
I think that you're right. There are moments though you go, "Ooh, that does sound very 83." Like there's just there are moments on this where you go, "Oh, you know, like they thought they were cutting edge at the time, but now you're like, that's very 83, you know." So
But it still holds up. The
still
songs are
good though.
very yeah,
Yeah.
if you sit down and play along to the songs with an acoustic guitar and just sing along with them, the songs hold up in a simple setting with just guitar and vocal on 90125 without all that production, and that's the hallmark of great songwriting. You can use production tricks to get people's attention, but once you have their attention for repeated listenings, you've gotta have solid material, and it has plenty of that.
The
So
song's got to be there. Absolutely. No question.
yep,
Song has to
yep,
be there, and they are, and absolutely are.
yep.
So yeah, so that's I would say that's a wrap. I mean, I don't know what else to say about these albums. We've really covered a lot of ground, and I mean, this is a ton to talk about with these albums, and we've hit it all. So, and so I hope you hope if you're still with us, I hope you enjoyed it. If you're a Yes fan, if you haven't listened to these albums in a while, I would say go back and listen to them because give them a shot. Turn it up. Put on drama and turn it up and let me know. I mean, let us know if you think we're crazy. We both pick drama. Somebody might say, "Are you nuts?" 9125 is amazing. Like it's a great record. How could you pick drama? So who knows? Everyone hears things differently, right? So so tell us what you think below, tell us what you think. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and of course give us a like and a subscribe if you I always have to say that, helps the channel. If you like what you're seeing, it helps us to do more of this, right? So hit a like, hit the like button, hit subscribe. And we will Scott, I hope you come back again. We'll
Oh, I'd
always
love to. Yeah, anytime,
you're always
anytime.
welcome, always welcome. So we'll have Scott back again for sure because he knows his stuff. So it's really fun to talk to him.
It's fun.
It's absolutely. We love talking music, man. We talk all day. So,
Yep.
so thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next time on Curless Mania. See ya.